Hello and welcome everyone to this evening's episode where I'll be chatting with Mark Scheeran and Michelle Dunbar from the Freedom Model. Hi guys, how you going? Thank you so much for joining me all the way from New York.
Yeah.
Thank you. We're happy to be here.
Yeah. It's going to be fun.
Yeah, it's going to be a really good chat. Look, I like just we were sort of previously chatting about, how I came across your work, your research, and the knowledge that I've been able to sort of obtain and learn and through my own deprogramming, like what people have been listening to, like the videos and interviews that I've been conducting around deprogramming and leaving 12 steps. This
Mhm.
this information has just been absolutely life-changing for me,
Yeah.
and a lot of people that I'm speaking to. And I'm just so excited to be having this conversation with you guys because the work, this is really important work. So firstly, thank you.
Yes. You're
Um,
welcome.
yeah, there's going to be a lot of people that are going to be excited to listen to this. So um, so let's firstly talk a little bit about you guys, your background, and I guess why you started this journey.
Yeah. So I think it starts with me a little bit
It does.
because I grew up in the cult of Alcoholics Anonymous, and literally my first memories, I can remember going to meetings with my mother at probably 6 years old, 7 years old. She would smuggle me into halfway houses that she was a counselor, and my parents were split up, and so I'd be spending weekends in halfway houses and rehabs with my mom as she worked, which was a very bizarre way to grow up. So I literally understand the treatment industry and Alcoholics Anonymous from the inside out, from the belly of the beast out. I was completely and totally immersed in that model since my first, childhood. And then eventually, of course, that sort of idea seeps into your head that you're going to be an alcoholic if you ever drink, if you're around that kind of culture, that treatment recovery, we call it the recovery society culture. And so at 12 years old, when I started drinking, I drank and drugged with a lot of guilt and shame. From the very first drink I ever had, I thought I was an alcoholic, and I fulfilled that prophecy. By 18, I was in deep trouble. Almost killed some people drunk driving. Was drinking every day. Had withdrawal in the morning. Um, Sort of got my act together after that. Quit drinking and drugging, but I went to AA, and because that's what I thought I needed to do. That was the ritual, right? So I was again fulfilling that prophecy that I would be an AA, and then I eventually got stuffed in treatment for 18 months because of the charges that were pending against me. I found out that I had no rights, that there's a lot of tyranny within the treatment community. Um, and that experience broke me because I never really fully believed I was an alcoholic, right? I didn't fully, there was a part of me that still held on to my autonomy, and they broke it. They took it away, and they worked on me for 18 months until I was totally suicidal, had a suicide attempt. And that very same day, I bumped into Michelle's father, Jerry Brown, and
At an AA meeting.
at an AA meeting because that's what we did.
Yeah.
And he had already started the skeleton research of the freedom model. I, of course, didn't know that. And he said, "You're not an alcoholic, you're a normal kid." And I just broke crying, sobbing, because nobody ever in my life, I had been to therapists since I was a kid, had ever said I was normal. And that word had never been uttered to me. And that one word completely broke the wall. Now, for the next 12 years, I'll jump to Michelle quickly, but the subsequent 12 years, Jerry and I became his research assistant. And then I walked out of AA with Michelle and her father over the next 12 years. I did the longest observational study by living with my guests at our first retreat, and we deconstructed the entire treatment model and created its opposite, which is freedom, right?
Mm.
Complete autonomy, freedom, and we called it the freedom model. So that's sort of the long story. But after my suicide attempt, and then I met Jer. Very soon, I think 2 weeks later, I met Michelle. So we've been working together as co-founders of the Freedom Model for 34 years, and we've helped about 27,000 people move past their addictions. So that's my
It's getting
story.
shivers up and down my whole body. This is, yeah, sorry. Keep going, Michelle.
So yes, I was immersed in AA. I grew up in it as well. My dad ended up getting like his last DUI in 1977 and was mandated to meetings for a year. That was right at the beginning of that, where the court system kind of married AA.
Yeah.
And now a bunch of people are getting thrown into the cult system
Right.
of
Recovery tyranny.
yeah.
Yeah.
And so he did that. And my dad has he's a Mensa guy. He has a extremely high IQ and so whenever people say, I can't believe I got sucked in. Well, my dad got sucked in
Yeah.
hardcore.
Yeah.
And as smart as he was a researcher with General Electric. He was a rising star in that company. And so he went to AA, he jumped in with both feet. And so from the age of 9 years old, he told me, oh, this is genetic. And if you ever touch alcohol or have a drug, you're going to be an alcoholic. And and in the beginning, it was kind of fun. And like he was bringing us to meetings, and we had this whole new group of people and friends, and there were AA people at our house all the time. I mean, talk about like jumping into a cult with both feet. So we didn't, we went from one day he was, drunk every night, but still going to work, and he was highly functional, to the next. There was all alcohol was scrubbed from our household, and it was evil. You couldn't have it. It was just this very strange thing. But then it became the norm. Like AA became the norm. But like Mark, it just was all questionable to me. It was questionable. Like I didn't understand how you could be out of control with a behavior that you had to think about to do.
Yeah.
And, but you know what? I started experimenting with alcohol and drugs when I was 13, 12, 13. And right from the beginning, I felt like this bad person. I liked the experience of being high. I liked the experience of being drunk, and I thought that was terrible. And so by the time I got my driver's license, I became a party girl. And so that was 16. And I kind of dove into partying and thought I'm going to get in all the partying I can, because eventually I know I'm going to have to go to AA and
Yeah.
be this boring, horrible, insufferable person.
Me too. I did the same thing. It's such a,
So
it's
did
such
I.
a, yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
So, but I didn't, but here's the weird thing. So my father, who had all those years been telling me, you're going to be an alcoholic, you're going to be an addict, you can never do this stuff, it's very powerful, blah, blah. So then he does this intervention with me in 1989, right around the time I met Mark. And by then I had failed out of college. I was working at this kind of dead end job, so to speak. I was living at home with my mother, but that was tenuous at best because my parents had split up. And we went to get it was Christmas time in 89, and we went to get our Christmas present from my dad, which was usually money. And so my sister was like, come on, we got to go get our Christmas present. So I go out there, and it turns into this I don't know if you can swear, but shit show of an
Yeah.
intervention where my sister is telling him all about my drunken and escapades, my drug use, my promiscuousness. She's going into all these details, and I'm horrified, like I humiliated. And I think Mark was like in the next room,
it was.
and
Got crazy.
and I just lost my mind. But here he is telling me, but you're not an alcoholic. There's no such thing. And you can be okay, but we have to, at that point, still it was still like, you can go to meetings with us, blah blah, we're doing something different. I didn't hear anything beyond really what my sister was talking about, with things that she had witnessed and things that she had gleaned from different perceptions of me. So I left and I dove deep into drinking. For that 6 months, I'd quit all drugs, but I did nothing but I went to work every day. But I drank from the moment I got up to the moment I went to bed. I was no more the party girl. I drank by myself. If I'm an alcoholic, then I'm an alcoholic. And my grandfather had died from drinking, and he died in withdrawal. And I remember what kind of alcoholic he was. In my mind, that's the image of it. So I became that image. And it wasn't fun. And so when people say that, I really don't like it. Well, the truth of the matter is, I genuinely believed, I can look back and genuinely believed my life was happier being able to drink what I wanted than it would be if by being forced into abstinence for the rest of my life. Like, I couldn't imagine my life without alcohol. And but I did get to the point where I was like sick as a dog. And simultaneously, there were all these. Now I was 22, and there were all these hot young guys like staying at my father's house. so,
Right.
so
Because we
I
had started the research and
it started
yeah.
they were all like under 30 years old. And as much as I was celibate at that point in time in my life because I was just such a mess, I was intrigued. And so I would like I ended up getting this dog and going out there and having to take because I couldn't keep the dog at my mother's and so I was intrigued. And so
And you have to understand too, at this point, Jer had already told us that no one's powerless. So
yeah,
the research had already started, and he said, all right, I'm going to open my home to a different model. And that is, we're just going to go to meetings and tell people they can be okay, because that's the truth. And he was doing the background research, and he goes, we're going to do an observational study. And he goes, Mark, I want you to lead this. I didn't know what I was doing. He had to teach me how to do research because I had no idea, which was awesome. And so obviously I was, I think 20 at the time, 19, 20. So I was attracting these younger guys into this idea that
from AA, they were all people that were in AA.
yeah. And so it ended up, there was 38 people, two women, Michelle and this other girl.
Which I had no idea that I was part of this stuff. I had no idea.
Yeah. So we kind of, it was a genuine observational study. So we would say things and then study the results of it. And after a year, 7 out of 10 of us, our lives were awesome and we were sober, right? Weren't drinking, which was crazy good results.
But he had a control group. He had a control group because in this study, there were people that were getting the message that, you're not powerless.
Right.
There is no disease.
You have a
can
choice.
be okay.
Yeah.
All of us in the study were under 30 years old. And then there were people in the study he was observing that were doing traditional AA.
Yep.
And at the end of that year, 7 out of 70% of us over in the thing where you can be okay were abstinent. And on the other group, none, zero, had stuck it out the full year, believing that they were powerless and that their lives were basically, doomed to like struggle and relapse. And sadly, some of those people are dead now.
Yeah. Well, a lot of those people just kind of disappeared. And we know of many that had died in the subsequent years in AA, in that
Like
sort of
in the
recovery mill.
Yeah.
And were taken advantage of. There was really horrible things going on. And I think that for us, as we got further and further and separated ourselves as a more freedom-oriented group, and we started to figure out that AA was a farce, and we became historians about the model, and we realized it was all made up fiction, that it was just bullshit, right? And that was a shock, because my whole life was invested in AA.
Yeah.
So that's why it took 12 years. It was like we looked at every single step, piece, tradition. We got involved in the corporate hierarchy. We dug in, and then we tried to change it internally, which we could not do because you can't change a cult internally. We learned that lesson. And so, that was 12 years. Then the subsequent 20 some odd years was perfecting our model, figuring out how to teach properly, how to not be judgmental, how to truly understand people's autonomy, understand human behavior with the positive drive principle. All these things that it took decades to figure out. So that's the story.
That's the story.
I'm sorry, it's long-winded, but
no. It's necessary to go into that because, people just adopt, like myself, I just adopted AA as a solution because it was given to me when I decided, like the thing is that I decided I wanted to stop drinking before I went into AA because I was just
That's
done.
right. Yep.
But
That's
I
right.
feel like that process of me stopping and actually changing my life was hijacked
Yes.
because that in it, like when you think about consciousness, right? It manifests in three ways: thoughts, emotions, and actions.
That's right.
In AA, you are taught that your first thought is wrong.
Yep.
That's right.
And that's the very creative essence of who we are as a human race. You know, you're being told that you cannot trust yourself.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's
And
That
the first earmark of a cult.
yeah.
it, you know what? And that, and now looking back at that, I would have not been able to figure that out because I was at a really vulnerable state in my life. And unfortunately, when people are at that state, they are very easily manipulated and influenced.
Yeah.
So yeah, everything that you guys have shared in regards to your journeys, like very similar belief systems. I wanted to I had a bad relationship with alcohol before I even started drinking because of my belief systems and what I was told
That's
about
right.
it in society. So
That's right.
I naturally hit it because I was judging myself,
Oh yeah.
really, you know.
Yeah.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
but I really want to talk about this cult, right? Because
Mhm.
even that's a pretty strong word, which I'm very
It is.
comfortable in calling it that because of the amount of damage it causes rather than good.
That's right.
And I've openly talked about it on my platform, calling it a cult, and I have had numerous people commenting and disagreeing, which that's fine. But the actual pillars of a cult, let's just maybe cover them briefly, starting with the money area, because that is where people get really caught up. I get a lot of people saying, yeah, but AA never asked more than much of me than a dollar in a basket. How are they making money? Like, can we maybe talk a little bit
Hmm.
about that
Mark knows.
aspect?
Mark knows a lot about that.
Yeah. So the way Bill Wilson constructed it. So if you look at their financials, let me back up. First of all, we have what's called a deprogramming from the 12 steps course. And I go through the finances. So if somebody wants to actually physically look at the finances, where the money comes from, and I demonstrate this cult money machine. Okay. So, but I'll go through it briefly here. But if you're really interested, it's like $50. But we go through an entire seminar series that you can download to your computer, and it goes through everything. First of all, it's money, but it's also cults take up a resource that's much more important than money. I'll get back to the money for a second, but it also takes your time and your allegiance, meaning you no longer have allegiance to your family because recovery has to be number one.
Right.
You no longer have allegiance to your boss because you have to make that meeting. You no longer have allegiance to your spouse because maybe they're drinking, so you should split up. So there's this price that is so undeniably terrible and all encompassing and unnecessary that those are the earmarks of a cult as well. But let's get to the money part, because everybody will point to it's free.
Mhm.
How can you, it helps people. And hey, I don't care if it's a cult. It could be a good cult, right? I hear that kind of
Oh, we hear that
absolute
all the
nonsense.
time.
So the way that works is Bill Wilson knew that he had to get a pyramid scheme. He actually he coined the phrase, people don't know this, pyramiding. It's in the big book. And we now understand what pyramiding is in industry. Well, he was the first one that figured it out. Actually, it goes back in religions, but he's the one in industry that figured it out. So what it is the whole model is predicated on only an alcoholic can work with another alcoholic, which is a lie. But by defining it that way, he sequestered a population and said, you're special. And we don't want any of these normies coming in and looking at things. So he's very smart about this. So he creates a recruitment model. And he knew that none of what he did worked for the first 4 years. Nobody stayed sober. People died. People were having affairs. People were being raped. I mean, this is all documented. And he even admits what a shit show it was. And he sat up in this clubhouse that he had created in Manhattan, and he said, I got to figure a way to make money. So he writes the big book, which is a book of fiction. None of what he wrote is true. All the statistical analysis never happened. None of that was real. So he just writes this fictional book. And in it, the entire book is a manual on how to recruit and keep people there based on guilt. And that is, your recovery is dependent on your service to your fellow alcoholic. In other words, it's just what the Jehovah's Witnesses do. The only way you get to heaven is if you give out tracts, go door to door. And the more you do that, the better the chance are that you're going to be the 144,000 that go to heaven. Okay. So Bill Wilson says, the only way you can keep it is by giving it away. What a perfect pyramid scheme. So the only way that you stay away from John Barleycorn, as he would call it, is if you recruit. And then he knew that because it was a failure, you had to keep that fear going and you had to continue to recruit. And if everybody just put $1 in and bought a book, if he had 1 million people doing that, it's $1 million a day. So people don't realize that their $1 is happening worldwide. And Bill had designed it based on fear and allegiance. And it's a perfect pyramid scheme as long as you have a straw man that terrifies you, which is booze. So he personified booze by saying alcohol is cunning, baffling, and powerful, which is read before every single meeting worldwide. Right. So you now have your straw man that you're battling against. You have your fear. You put your $1 in the basket and you serve and you recruit. It's literally how cults are constructed. He was the most successful marketing cult leader in the history of the United States and Western culture. And it's lasted 80 years, which is astounding because the straw man is so powerful. The icon that alcohol is cunning, baffling, and powerful is so powerful.
And when you add in AA approved literature,
yeah,
right?
Yeah.
So the only book you can work off of is our book, the big book. And by the way, it's what, $5 at the time we were there, which was 30 years ago.
Yeah, I think it's like $15.
Yeah. So and he wanted to make sure, and then the treatment industry started really with this model, and he wanted to make sure that every treatment facility bought loads of his books and they gave them out to everybody that was in there. So that is a massive recruitment model.
Yeah. So what he did was he built what the Gideons do with the Bibles in every hotel. Their mission is that every hotel room will have a Bible in it. And if you go to any hotel, at least in America, I don't know about in Australia, but there's a Bible, Holy Bible, and it doesn't matter what motel, anywhere.
It's brilliant.
And it is brilliant. So Bill Wilson said his initial plan was to have a hospital with various floors where you would recruit in the detox while somebody was the most vulnerable and sickest. And they did that in the early days, and they still do it. But it's now just been formalized into our culture. It's now been mainstreamed. So you would attack the guy, get him to surrender, and they call it ego deflation at depth. Which is so insane because when you're sitting in detox, you're about as deflated as you can get.
Sure.
Can you imagine somebody coming in and then torturing you and saying, you have no way, there's no way you're ever going to get well. You need us, which is where sponsorship came from. You had to be sponsored in, kind of like you're patched into a motorcycle club. You had to surrender adequately or your sponsor would not allow you at meetings. That's where sponsorship came from. So you would literally spend a week at the bedside of a detox bed, hammering this person that they cannot do this alone. And so Bill Wilson said that's the first stage of indoctrination. Second stage is what he called a halfway house, right? We're going to pull them into the AA clubhouse. Halfway, they're halfway there to full surrender. And then it was the meeting structure and the $1 in the basket, and you buy a book, which is your recruitment manual because you have working with others, 2 employers, 2 wives, you're indoctrinating everybody.
Like everybody.
The whole book is geared towards, pulling people in dollar in the basket. Another book sold, dollar in the basket. And Bill Wilson said it. He goes, I want to die a millionaire. You can find these quotes. And he died a millionaire, begging for whiskey, by the way, on his deathbed. It's so pathetic. The whole thing is so
And
tragic.
he died from smoking.
Yeah.
I mean, he died because of his smoking habits.
Yeah.
I was not a real smoker until I went to AA.
Yeah.
And the worst thing as well is that people look up to him like this deity god character.
Oh, yeah.
And it's even in Australia, people like, I think there were, I did a lot of Zoom meetings throughout the lockdowns, and I got to really know AA globally because I was going through, because I was
Oh,
like, oh my
right.
God, I needed meetings.
Yeah.
Well, I
Right.
thought I needed meetings. So I really got to, on a global scale, meet a lot of women, and got to know this, how big this really was, because I predominantly only went to meetings in Australia. I did a few in the UK, but mainly in Australia. So it was really interesting. But yeah, it's, I don't know. Listening to this, I've had to listen to this information a few times over to let it really sink in, because it's really heartbreaking, at first.
Yeah.
Because
It's brutal.
your whole foundation of your existence and your belief system is built
Yeah.
on this idea that is based on a complete lie. And it's just like, and you can't even really get angry at your friends or your in AA, because no one, because it's the way
That's
it's being
right.
propagated. It's like, how, it's like, who do I get angry with?
I know,
I-
right? Because I tell people that when we're working with people that are leaving, and they're people go through stages, and they're so angry with their sponsor, and they're so angry with, I mean, I've worked with a lot of women who married people they met in AA, and they get angry with their spouses. And it's like, no, they're victims too. Even though they turn around and victimize, they're doing it because they believe in every fiber of their being that they have to, spread the message. They have to keep people in the cult in order for themselves to be okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it all really comes down to the straw man, doesn't it? If you have a boogeyman and you believe the boogeyman is real, you will do anything to survive and stay away from that boogeyman. And Bill Wilson was a master, an absolute master of hyperbole. He was so good throughout the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous to demonize alcohol as a living entity, that it really had a motive and a mind of its own, and that you don't. And that he was also a master at mixing truth with fiction, with his fiction. So he would, even the first step is masterful in its cult like ability to indoctrinate. You're powerless over alcohol and your life had become unmanageable. If he had just said you're powerless over alcohol, half the people would go, no, I'm not.
Right.
But the way
Right.
you get 100% to buy in is you slip in the truth, and that is your life is unmanageable. Everybody's life is unmanageable because life is a shitstorm, right? Humans will do just about anything to be happy. So, and most people are generally discontented at some point. So he honed in on that and said, well, how can I get people to believe that alcohol is actually in control? Now, prior to Bill Wilson, nobody believed that alcohol was a spirit in the way that
That it
Bill
takes
defined
over
it.
your life.
Right. They called it spirits. They called it the good creature of God, pre AA. But everybody knew that it was a substance, not a living creature or an entity that was out to get you. So Bill took all these ideas and just crafted it in a way that vulnerable people who were having their ass kicked because of drinking and drugging, uh, and just made it believable that this thing was out to get them. So once you do that, then people start saying, well, maybe I do need God. So he has a supernatural boogeyman and then a supernatural solution that nobody can really point to. So nobody's real, and everybody's just kind of chasing this ideal. And now I'm Catholic and I believe in God, but I don't think God ever took my alcoholism away because I never had alcoholism. I mean, it's just so fucking weird. The whole thing is so confusing. So that's the way he did it.
Yeah,
Muddied the water.
and he's a genius in because he's literally made his fantasy real, and he's succeeded at it. And it's like, well, I actually, in a sick twist, well, I have a little bit of respect for someone that can actually get away with that, in a weird way, because that takes a lot of power and energy to create something like that. But anyway, moving forward, because I want to really talk about as well, I guess, the idea of this, that even the word alcoholic, right? That there's no such thing as an alcoholic. When I say that to people, they just their brains go, they're like, because
I
it's,
know.
and that to me as well, when I first heard you guys say it, and I think it was you, Mark, in the book. I can't remember whether, but you said that, I believe it was you that said, I will never be an alcoholic again, or an addict again.
That was
And
Steve. That was
that was
Steve.
Steve.
Steven.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I at first didn't get that. And I was like, oh, what do you mean you're never going to be that again? Anyway. And then once I sort of unpacked that the disease doesn't exist and that it's a choice. So maybe talk a little bit about, firstly, the disease concept. How is that a lie and a myth versus to what the idea of behavior and choice?
I'll start and then you can jump in. I'll say something very brief. Addiction as a disease is defined by one thing, and that is, at its most simple level, you are compelled to drink and or drug beyond your free will. And that's just not true. So talk about Nisark. Well, we know that everybody gets over the problem.
Well, the whole idea is predicated on powerlessness. And the truth of the matter is, it's a young idea. It's a young idea. It's less than, honestly, here. I think the first person that talked about alcoholism was Dr. Benjamin Rush, and he was a founding father of the United States. So that's what, 250 years ago, not even. And everybody thought, at the time, they were like, he's kind of a kook, because he also thought being black was a disease. He called it Negroism. He thought being gay was a disease. And so he just, anything that seemed outside of normal to him, he coined as a disease. And sadly, he's like the father of like American psychiatry. So,
wow.
I mean, it just gives you an idea. I mean, there was a strong movement at that time too, to demonize alcohol. Our country was founded on that, that alcohol was the angel and the devil. And it was either the best thing that you could ever have. And there were lots of a few of our founding fathers of this country that were very loved alcohol, were very heavy drinkers. And then there were the people that were like, no, it's evil. It's terrible. There was the Puritans, right? Because our country was founded on freedom of religion. And I mean, that's why the settlers came over here. So really the whole concept of the disease of alcoholism was based on this idea that if you like being drunk, there's something broken in you.
Yeah, there's something wrong with you, because there was a quiet temperance movement. So I'll go back to what Michelle was saying. So when the colonists came over from England and from Europe and founded this country, the first two things that were built in the 13 colonies was a church and a still.
Yes.
Okay. And it was the good creature of God. And when you look at the recorded history at that time, everybody drank. They drank young, because in Europe, water was poisonous and would kill you because of the pathogens, because, there was
no way to clean it.
Right. There was no septic systems. So
nothing can grow in alcohol.
Right. So essentially you died at about, the average age of living was about 32 years old, because you poisoned yourself to death. But here's the deal with that. They didn't have problems. If you look at the history, the recorded history of alcohol in this country, from the colonial times straight up almost to Bill Wilson, there was the Civil War, really, in the 1860s. There was no recorded history of problems from alcohol. They didn't view it that way, so they didn't have the problems. That alcoholism didn't exist. None of that existed. It wasn't until the temperance movement, post-Civil War, getting into the 20th century, and women's rights. Women didn't like in the Industrial Revolution that their husbands were going to the bar instead of drinking at home. It was the first time the family unit had separated. Bill Wilson tapped into that industrial, and then the Depression.
Well, the prohibition also happened.
That's right.
Here in the 20s.
Wow.
Yeah.
So he tapped into all these forces in society, and it was the perfect storm of we hate alcohol, the entire women suffrage, getting voting rights, and then having rights and having a voice, and that was all run by women. And he just tapped in and said, oh, everybody's feeling bad about alcohol right now.
That's right.
I have it. It's demon alcohol. Now I'm going to use the word spirits. John Barleycorn is out to get you, right? All this hyperbole. So the disease concept, let's get back to that, is, so now you know the history of it, how Bill was able to tap in, but it's defined as being compelled beyond your free will. So when we say alcoholism doesn't exist, there is no nebulous force by which you are compelled to use. So when people say, you're saying alcoholism doesn't exist, look at how people drink and look at their dying. And I say, I know that. I'm not saying that people don't die or that they don't drink. For Christ's sake, I drank like a fish and almost killed myself a couple of times. I get it. I'm not saying withdrawal doesn't exist. I'm not saying it doesn't ravage the body. I'm not saying any of that. What I'm saying is you're choosing. You are not compelled by a nebulous force. There is no thing called addiction out to get you.
You're never out of control.
That's right.
And we know this is true because, well, first of all, so nobody really took the disease concept seriously until Bill Wilson. And then Bill Wilson was such a good marketer. He was so good at networking. He got the right people in the right places. They hired this scientist, Yelnick, to prove that alcoholism was a disease. And on our parent company website, we have a research paper that basically debunks all of it, because it turns out. So it turns out Yelnick was a fraud. He wasn't real, and the research he did was terribly flawed. But by the time everybody knew that, it had taken hold in our society here, because there was a way to explain away the people that seemingly drank to their death, right? So that was this very convenient thing, and it was a means to control people. It was a means to say, you're broken, you're immoral, you're spiritually bankrupt, and that means we need to control your life.
That's right. That's right. And the irony of this whole thing with Yelnick doing the study, right, to prove that alcoholism exists as a disease state or a disorder.
The 1950s, right?
Yeah, 40s and 50s.
So very young, not even 100 years ago.
And that study was retracted by Yale because they realized that he took out all the sample size that didn't agree with his theory. I mean, literally fucking
threw out all the ones that didn't fit.
He's literally
that research.
The fact that it passed muster at first is so crazy to me.
It is.
But it was retracted, yet to this day, it's the gold standard.
It is.
Of research that proves for health insurance companies, because in 1951, when the American Medical Association made it a disease, they declared it, quote unquote, declared it a disease, never proved it, didn't go through studies. They used Yelnick's study, they declared it, then they retracted the study. And everybody ignored that, because all that mattered was funding. It was all about, and now Big Pharma has made the focus on brain chemistry, like your brain, this gelatinous bloody thing in your head, is making you behave somehow. Like it has a mind of its own, and then your mind, and it's telling you. I mean, it's so crazy. The whole thing is crazy. But Big Pharma now has a hold of the recovery community, and so it's all about drugs and money.
And which leads me into the next point that I really want to talk about, is because in AA, there are no doctors, psychologists, therapists
That's
that are
right.
actually leading these meetings, right? And so
Right.
what I find extremely dangerous, which is a huge wake up call for me in regards to having to speak out about this, was that people are dying thinking that they are sick. They're committing
Yes.
suicide, they're drinking themselves to
Yes.
death because they
Yes.
believe that they've got this incurable, fatal, progressive disease that has been propagated and told to them either directly by a sponsor or indirectly from the stories that they hear. Now, that's people practicing medicine in without a license, as far as I can see.
For sure.
Yeah.
It
So,
was Bill
so
Wilson started with the original Bill
yeah.
Wilson.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So how so people aren't above the law, right? And so how do you guys see moving forward in in the future of how we can actually take action in either regulating this because it is a cult. So we can't change a cult from the inside, right? Like you've said, you've tried it.
Right.
Yeah.
So
Right.
how do we do this? Like, is it lawsuits when people start to sue AA, or is it like
Well,
what do you guys see like this
Yes.
going?
They protect themselves really well. We actually sued AA at one point.
mhm. Yeah.
It's tough with something that's so now not just ingrained in the United States, the culture here, but it's in all like the first world countries, right? It proliferated everywhere, and I think the only way, I don't know about what Mark thinks, but I think the only way is to have a viable to challenge it the way we've challenged it with our book, with our work, and to just keep kind of throwing out that look at there's a ton of research that's already been done that absolutely guts AA's theories. And I mean, and I didn't get to say that one of the things that we do in our masterclass is we actually debunk powerlessness, which is the basis of the disease theory, the basis that you are powerless. That's been debunked since the 1970s. Like fully, if behavioral research could be conclusive, which a lot of behavioral researchers will say it can't. But this is about as conclusive as it can be
It is.
because when people don't know that they're drinking alcohol, they don't lose control, even though they're actually drinking alcohol. We see that over and over and over again
Right.
in
And
the
that's in the
research.
priming dose studies
Yep.
that we go over.
When you offer supposed cocaine addicts and methamphetamine addicts money to instead, you give them a free hit, and then you say, "Hey, I'm going to give you some money at the end of, but you can't get it for a month, or you can get another hit of this drug that you're supposedly so addicted to you can't stop." They have a price. At the $20 level, they'll pick the money every single time. And so there's no loss of control there. You look at opiates, which is the demon drug of the day, and you see that the vast majority of people, more than 98% of people that use cocaine or that use opiates recreationally don't even get hooked, so to speak. The vast majority, and it's more than 99% who are prescribed opiates, don't go seek out heroin. The whole narrative has been disproven over and over again, but it's tough for people to see because our culture is so
Mm.
and it's like, well, if you look for a red car, you'll see a red car. If you look for evidence that alcoholism and addiction is an actual disease, you'll see it.
You'll see it
Yeah.
that way, right? It'll color your thinking. So there's some real metrics of hope. And that is that 95% of the people that go to AA stop going within the
That's right.
first year and never go back. So here we have a model that, and Bill knew this, by the way. He needed a certain percentage to stay. That's why he has to get the dollar and the book sold. And that's why the recruitment model is, because it's so important for their pyramid to work, is they have to have the bottom of the pyramid be massive, right? So he knew he had to have a world domination model because there was such attrition out. He had to get as much money as quickly as possible. So most people go to about 2 meetings. If you took 100 people, about 50 will go to 2 meetings and then drop out. And then a certain percentage like you, me, and Michelle will stick it out sometimes for a lifetime. my parents, right? My mother. So but that's when you're getting to the top of the pyramid. You very, very, very few people worldwide become gurus like my mom did, or like I did, or like Michelle did. We were gurus. We went to 3,000 AA meetings, right?
Yeah.
And I'm embarrassed to
And
say
you
that.
probably were too.
Yeah, you start.
I went to a few.
Yeah. So your question, the answer to your question is, it's just like the media. The media gives a narrative that's complete bullshit, and they bombard you with it, but you don't realize that there's a sea of people that disagree just like you do until you start talking out in the street and you go, I don't think that this is really happening. People, yeah, it's bullshit, dude. Yeah, and then talking to another, yeah, I don't believe that shit.
Yeah.
Right. So humans are very smart. And we have a tendency to think that we're being led by our phones. We're being led. And there's a certain degree that that's true, but there's many more people that think the way we do. They have common sense. They say, this doesn't jive. That's why cults always fail. In the fullness of time, all things get done. So what's the angle with the freedom model? We're just the alternative. And people like you will talk about it, and we're growing. Every day we're growing.
Yeah.
We're not getting smaller. We're growing. AA is getting smaller.
Yes.
You need to know that statistically, they are struggling and have been for about 10 years. They've plateaued for 10 years. And when you have an organization that's 80 years old, that was on the upswing for 70 of it, now and for 10 of it, it's flat and slightly going down.
That's partly because of the shutdowns, the lockdowns. When people couldn't actually get to meetings, it gutted their finances just a bit. Because
they were actually asking for money on online Zoom meetings. I was like, do you guys supposed to do that?
Yes, that's exactly right. Like, I thought the money was for the church venue and for the coffee. And I'm providing that.
That actually was like, because they were like, yeah, our prudent reserve, like someone high up, from like one of the head offices. I can't remember her name, or it doesn't matter. But the point was that she was asking outright. I was like, that's not right. But anyway, I remember that like really clearly.
Yes. And I think a lot of people got a little wise. And then what happened to a lot of people was when they stopped going to meetings and they realized they were okay. Now, I've worked with Mark and I both worked with people who stopped going to meetings, went off the deep end, right? And then they were like, I'm not going back to that. I'm not going back. Like it kind of opened that door
for questions.
Yeah, for questions. Like, was this even working? Like people started questioning things.
And the ruse. See, there's a certain value in AA to the ritual and the people. So when you leave your home, you go to a meeting, you're distracted. You're distracted from drinking, and you're in a special society that knows you, and you feel a part of it. Well, you take away the church basement, you take away the car ride, you take away, and you just say, what is this?
Yes.
And you're on a Zoom meeting and you're like, this is fucking stupid.
This is weird.
Yeah,
this is weird.
And they're asking me for cash. This is kind of weird.
Right? Yeah. I already got to pay for Zoom. Like, what are we talking about?
Oh, it was such a wake up call. It was brilliant. You have to laugh at it at some point. Otherwise it'll just eat you up, right?
Yeah.
I'm just being conscious of time. I really want to focus on the actual freedom model solutions, okay? Because I am talking to people every second day on the phone that are reaching out to me in Australia, people that are actually reaching out to you guys as well. It's awesome. And there are a lot of people that are just like, as well, like a specific one lady that's really been, she's again in AA all her life, and that she's had like panic attacks, physical panic attacks from the like she's starting the deprogramming. And so I guess let's go into this maybe. I don't know my question.
Well,
well,
sorry, I just
like why don't we talk about what do we do?
Yeah, that's it. Sorry.
Okay, go ahead, Michelle.
Well, I've coached now
Tens of thousands.
Lots of people
a lot
leave AA specifically, right? Like I've helped people. I started a blog talk radio show in 2011, right? Before that was a big thing. Before podcasts were a big thing.
Yeah.
We had a person that worked with us. It was like, you should do this. And I'm like, I don't even know what that is. But we did it. We did it for a couple years. And that was when I met Monica. She had a show. I went on her show, and then she came on mine. And the thing that she was talking to me about the most was, because she had left AA, was, you know, how do people deprogram? Like, how do you deprogram to the point where you can drink? Like that was her thing. She's like, so if there's no such thing as alcoholism, if there's no such thing as addiction, does that mean that there's no such thing as a class of people that can't successfully moderate, that can't successfully change their relationship with alcohol? And I'm like, that's what that means. And for me, that was part of the, like, you're fully deprogrammed. And we're not saying from the freedom model that, yeah, you should go back and drink again. We're not saying that at all.
Right.
What we're saying is, if you want to be abstinent, awesome, but choose abstinence based on the knowledge that I'm happier not drinking, rather than I'm terrified that if I drink again, I'm that person that isn't going to be able to do it. And it's gonna lead me down a path again. So I've coached people. Mark and I both. What we do is we do coaching for deprogramming. We could do coaching for solving the problem with alcohol and drugs. So our coaching takes on different forms.
Yeah. So I think our most intense option is we do a workshop. Michelle and I do a workshop with one person. They fly in. We literally spend 2 full days going through this curriculum. Right?
We can take people through it in 2 days.
And that's that's 470 pages. It's 174 slides and a presentation, but they're in the room right next door. Actually, this is the studio. And we get in the classroom and but out of that 174 slides, maybe 40 will apply to that person, because we have this guide, the freedom model, right, for addictions. This book, has all the information to deprogram. It's all there. That's what we spent 34 years building. But each person may not have all
those beliefs
of the mythology that we debunk here. They may have, out of 34 myths that we've identified, they may have 5. But those 5 are killing them.
Stick it. They're stuck.
It's blinding them from the reality that they are in control of their lives and always have been. And so we deconstruct. So we use what's called the Socratic method. So Michelle and I get together with them. We ask a lot of questions the first day. And
build the puzzle.
And we build the puzzle of their life and their binge construct. How do they mentally think they are powerless? And in what ways and how? And what are the rituals and beliefs that build that tyranny within themselves? Then the second day, we deconstruct it. We challenge each one with the facts, and they literally can deprogram. Then when they go home, we give them 3 more support sessions virtually, like we're doing with you.
Because they're applying what they learned. And so it's an experiential learning process.
That's right.
And what's so amazing is everybody's different. That the whole addiction treatment model is predicated on, if you're a drunk, you're the same as the next drunk. And if you're an addict, you're the same as the other addict. And if your lips are moving, you're lying. It's all that nonsense. And it's like, no, people are individuals and everybody's different. Everybody has a little bit different belief systems.
It's complex.
They have different rituals. And so you've got, with each person, you've got to kind of figure that out.
So then we support them for those 3 sessions, and then they also get a complimentary online program membership for a year, which allows them to do our group Q&As each month, and has all pre-recorded tutorials, 150 pre-recorded tutorials that they can do online by themselves. That's Michelle and I teaching them. So they get, that's a massive, intense deprogramming and life enhancing. It's not just deprogram, because you can actually deprogram in about 2 days. You really can. Now, emotionally, it might take you a little while to emotionally catch up, but you can, once you have the facts, it's just the emotions have to catch up. Then once the emotions catch up, which can actually happen fairly quickly, but in some cases like myself, it takes a little longer because how deep I was. Then our program is all about moving on.
Well, and I think we provide that year, or the online program is kind of good for people because of the culture that we're in, where if you start talking about our concepts in the real world, I mean, there's 50% of the people you're going to encounter are going to be like, no, you're totally dead. I mean, even people that don't have experience with their own personal, substance use problems are going to tell you, no, that's wrong. You should be going to AA. I mean, because it's so ingrained in our culture, because what we're doing, sadly, although it's based in truth and research, is countercultural.
Yeah, so it's wonderful to be able to have a conversation. Say you're taking your kid to wrestling practice, right? And you're in the parent room and somebody's talking about how their son is on Suboxone and is addicted to heroin and the addictiveness and and they're just going
All
on with
that.
all the mythology. It pains me to hear it, right? And let's say that I was just in the deprogramming course, I would be like, oh my God, that does sound right. And you start to doubt
Yeah.
everything.
You're like, wait a minute,
So then you can go back to the online course and be like, okay, there's the topic about heroin. And there's Michelle
Yeah.
and Mark saying, rest assured, you're okay. Let's go over the research again. So we have that. Then we have virtual coaching where it's a little shorter in duration. It's not a year. It's usually about 4 to 6 weeks. We do 14 sessions to get through the entire
Yeah, we have
curriculum.
all different options because we work with people one-on-one. We can tailor coaching to. I mean, I have people that have the online program that buy individual sessions from me every few weeks on concepts that they're struggling with, to try and, some people want to take a longer time to figure the puzzle out.
Yeah. And then affordably, let's say that if you have $50, I give you the deprogramming seminar series. It's 5 seminars. It's online.
It's all about deprogram from AA.
Yeah, I define AA. I go through all the mythology, the lies, and I deconstruct it, the money, where Bill Wilson came from, where the cult came from, and how you can frame out
And how it works.
and how it works.
How it works.
How
For real.
How it
the
really
cult
works.
So
Oh,
yeah,
wow.
so we
Yeah.
have everything. We have a whole system to completely deconstruct the lies. So the main thing is so you can just move on,
Yeah.
with your life.
Yeah. And that's what I just did the audiobook version. For me, that's what
Yeah.
helped. And then I've gone back and bought the book and just go over the little things when I need to. But what I really found that the key for me was when you spoke about the pursuit of happiness,
Yes.
what ultimately what makes you
Yes.
happy. And that really just went, oh yeah, I don't actually,
Yes.
that doesn't make me happy doing that anymore.
That's
Like
so good.
yeah, like after I felt comfortable that I did enough sort of deprogramming, I guess you could say it, and the emotions sort of caught up and I processed a lot of it. I did break my abstinence and
Yeah.
nothing happened. Tragic. Like that, and I get like I'm really excited about that because I've always enjoyed the taste, but I've always
Yeah.
like had this guilt and shame and judgment wrapped around it. But now I'm just like, fuck it, like I can moderate
Yes.
and feel good about it. And
Yeah.
drinking like I used to, like there's just absolutely nothing exciting about that or even enjoyable.
That's right.
Like that doesn't even cross my mind. I got more important shit to do, right? So
That's right. That's right.
So I love that idea. Talk just a little bit about that pursuit of happiness because that's huge.
Yeah, that is huge. Do you have anything?
No, that's Mark. Well, I wanted to say when Mark coined the positive drive principle, this was like, I don't know, 2004, 2005. And he's like, I genuinely believe. And so we're in a business meeting. At the time, we had like 70 employees. We had 2 retreats. And he was like, I think that everything we do is in the pursuit of happiness. And a bunch of us who we were basically curriculum development people, and we're like, oh, I don't think that's true. Like on its face, we all were like, no. And he's like, okay. And so this was like a weekend retreat that we had, like business thing, product development retreat. And he goes, so for the next 24 hours, I want you to think of something that you do that you don't do to be happier in that moment, that isn't, and so
In
we
your
and
self-interest.
your self-interest. And so we all thought we were so smart, we came up with all these things. And I had just come out of the raising young children phase. So I was like, changing a poopy diaper. And he's like, well, of course you're doing that in the pursuit of happiness. I'm like, well, it doesn't make me happy to do it. And he's like,
The alternative would
leaving your baby in a
shit.
crappy diaper like make you happier? And I'm like, well, no. And he's like, there you go.
I rest my case.
Yeah.
And the people came up with suicide.
Oh,
And
yeah.
I said, well, have you ever attempted suicide? I have
Yeah.
twice. And I can tell you at those dark moments,
You think
no life was more attractive to me than life, because my life had gotten so
sad.
terrible. Well, it is sad, but it is the reality of actual suicide attempts. So they started, and that's relative happiness. That's and when you're down near death, one thing
That's such a low point.
yeah, your options are very narrow. So happiness values are different than the happiness value of getting married and watching your daughter be born.
Yeah.
But when we frame, and I think that to your point, when we frame our lives by the benefits of our options, meaning, would I be happier to stay with my wife or divorce her? What are the benefits of divorce? And what are the benefits of staying? Instead of, God damn it, my wife's a bitch, right? Or focusing on the negativity of things, which never seems to solve the problem, does it? When we focus on downsides and negatives and consequences and costs
to try and change,
try to change, we hit a wall, and then we drink and drug, and we continue to have marital problems, and we continue to have career problems. It's only when we shift our thinking to how human behavior actually works, because your positive drive will always shift to a forward evolutionary process. Your mind will always shift to, God, I would be happier being divorced. And then you get divorced. Or I really love my wife, and
I would be happier staying. Let me see if I can
that
work through those problems.
But in the comparing of options is where the positive drive principle is such a powerful tool. People always ask me, what tools? Yeah, I say one tool, positive drive principle. Focus on a benefits to benefits analysis, and your life will change. It will lead a path that is so freaking efficient, and you will be able to see things you've never saw before, because you're using how you are actually created instead of banging your head against the wall on negatives. And there's a great analogy that we see in memes, and I'll end with this. The human mind and psyche does not work on negatives, right? For instance, you're skiing down a hill and you're in the woods skiing, and they say, don't hit the trees. Then you're looking at trees. Suddenly you hit a tree, because you will literally be attracted to that. So don't hit the trees. Instead, then the positive drive principle, practicing the positive drive, would be follow the snow around the trees. Suddenly you're not hitting trees. Yeah. So when we focus on the positives and how our mind works, not on the don'ts, but
not on the fear.
That's right. Convert all don'ts to, what is the benefit of the don't? What is the benefit of looking at the path instead of the trees? What is the benefit of what is the benefit of looking at the trees? There is no benefit. I'm going to hit it. Oh my God, why don't I stop doing that? Why don't I look at this other path? Suddenly that became very efficient. So that when I figured all that out and I put it to the test with my team, we actually tested it for like a year.
We did.
Before I wrote
it in the book.
I was like, you got to find me something that people do that they don't want to do. And then people would come up with
that they don't want to do and don't see any benefit in doing.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, I was very specific, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And it changed lives.
I
Mm.
actually went from being somebody who hated doing dishes, like applying this to my life, like I hated like that was one of the chores I hated. And it was just drudgery and I just hated doing it, to being like I like doing dishes because I would focus on I love a clean kitchen.
Yeah.
I
Major
mean,
difference.
so you can actually change your whole attitude. It's the same with like exercise and eating differently and whatever it is you want to do, you can actually, if you shift your focus to really going with the way the human psyche actually works, it makes change pretty damn easy.
And lastly, you have to get rid of your guilt and shame first. If you hang
That's
on to
so
guilt and
true.
shame, you can't do any analysis at all. It will block you from it. So you have to put your guilt and shame, if you have a lot of it, put it on a shelf temporarily. Just say, okay, I'm that kind of person that feels shitty about myself all the time. I used to be that guy,
Me too.
right? So I had to learn, at least temporarily, to put it on, do my analysis, and feel good about it. And then I was like, why the hell did I have the guilt to begin with? And it
Yeah.
started to undo guilt. But I
Yes.
had to literally shut that part of my mind off because that was
To be able to
toxic.
identify how much do I really like what I'm
Yes.
doing.
Yes. To do analysis, you can't have guilt and shame.
Yeah. So what I don't know how to actually ask the next question again. I'm kind of in this weird, but like I don't know if this is my old belief system or thinking, but looking at the parts of yourself that you don't like characteristics, behaviors, which all can all be changed. Sometimes people have said to me, best just to ignore it. But I found that if I've ignored it, it's grown into something bigger. So
Mhm.
if you look at it from the perspective of like trauma, if you've had
Mm-hmm.
trauma in your childhood and
Mm-hmm.
like and you don't address it, you know, you start to act on it further in your adult life.
Mm-hmm.
Like I've found that it was really important to look at that stuff,
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
heal it. I don't know if this is yeah, and then um apply the positive drive principle also
Mm-hmm.
as well, because then you need to move forward because you don't want to sit in that, right?
Right.
So I guess this is around that whole step 4, step 4 stuff, right?
Yes.
Um, that I found a little bit of benefit in it, but I didn't feel comfortable sharing it with anyone.
Right. Right.
So I don't know exactly what my question is, but like trauma, like people have a lot of trauma, right? So how do we,
Mhm.
what are your suggestions around that?
Yeah. Michelle said something not that long ago on our podcast that was super smart, and that is, what first, before you deal with trauma, you have to ask yourself, what does healing from my trauma mean? So you start from the result end first. What am I trying to accomplish? And I now the reason that was so smart is because if you say, I'm going to heal my trauma, which means I'm going to talk about it incessantly with a therapist, and I'm going to deal with that for years and years and years, that's not dealing with trauma because there's no end point. You're regurgitating pain, and that's bad therapy. Okay. So when Michelle said that, I said, holy shit, that is the key. First, you have to decide whether you want to get over your trauma for real and let it go. Is that the goal? If that's the goal,
You have to know what that looks like
yeah,
in your life and how to apply it. So a good example for me is I when I had I had trauma in my childhood. My father was horrifically abusive, both verbally and physically. And so when I had my own children and my husband would get the least bit angry with them, I would literally lose my mind. Like I would, it was absolutely not an appropriate response, because you know what? 3-year-olds need to be disciplined or they're going to hurt themselves.
Yeah.
Right. So for me, I had to look at moving past that trauma from my childhood. The way that looked for me in my life was I have to allow my husband to actually discipline my children.
Right. To be a dad.
I have to be able to trust and know that I didn't pick my father for a husband, number one, because if I did, I got to get the hell out of there. And I didn't. But I didn't even recognize it at first, which was tough. But what I did recognize is I have to change that response. And I want to be able to feel okay when my children are being disciplined. I want
So
to be able to,
that's the point right there, is that you were able to identify first what letting go of trauma looked like.
yeah.
You had to,
Right.
so you have to define the end result is, I want to be free. For me, I grew up in an extremely bullied, violent, abusive, terribly neglectful place. Really horrible. Really, it took horrendous beatings that most people can't even
He was
imagine.
the youngest of 12.
Yeah, and with no parents, in a
Mhm.
house sequestered in the woods. I mean, it was a drug house. It was fucking insane, and it was awful. And so at 19, 20, when I met Jer, I would be in public places, and I was sizing everybody up. I was tense all the time. And then one day I said, I don't want to fucking live like this anymore. I can't constantly feel like I need to protect myself, because once I was out of my environment where the trauma was, it just didn't fit anymore. It was destroying every friendship. I was out of my mind inside. So I could see in my mind, I don't want that anymore.
Mhm.
So now I had my destination. The end of trauma for me was my past trauma no longer had bearing on my reactions.
Yeah.
Once you define that, then you have cues in your environment.
That's right.
Cues are, for me, loud noises, people that are busting my balls, kind of. I would take it as, you know what, I'm going to knock your teeth out, because I felt like a beating was coming next. So I had to say, wait a minute. And I would talk with Jer. I'd get the cue. I'd get the internal reaction ready to fight. And then I would immediately go to Jer and say, is this real? He'd go,
Right.
absolutely
Right.
not. Absolutely not. And then I could see the positive drive of moving past that and ending it. So people ask me all the time, I'm healing my trauma. I said, what does that look like? And they go, what do you mean? I'm working on it. I go, no, you're not. You're perpetuating it
Mm.
Right.
by talking about it. You have to have an end goal first. What does ending your trauma mean? And most people don't have a goal. Did you
They
know that?
don't know.
No,
They don't understand.
because therapy is bad.
Right, right. They don't understand that trauma only affects your life. There has to be trauma only affects your life today, if you allow it to, and and then you have to know where you're allowing it to,
That's right.
in order to be like, okay, this is improper reactions to cues. People call them triggers, but we call them cues because they're reminders, right?
Yeah,
They're
Yeah.
reminders.
Yeah, they're not real trauma.
No,
It's
it's
a
not
cue.
happening again.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah,
And it's whether or not you fall victim to it, right? Because
that's
once you
right.
fall victim to it, then you are still that victim. And
That's
Yeah.
where it
right.
comes back to choice. Do I
Yeah.
actually want to let this go, move forward, be
Exactly.
happy?
Yes.
And I had this conversation with this guy last night at dinner, and he said, "Oh, there's a lady I really want you to talk to. She keeps relapsing and stuff." And I'm like, I personally, like, I'm not sure if I'm ready to sort of talk to people yet, but I just said to him, firstly, one of the biggest things that I just knew this intuitively because I've experienced it, is that a lot of people go through rehabs constantly throughout their whole life, and they
Yes.
suffer, is because that's what they're choosing to do.
That's right.
Yes.
They're
They see
choosing
value
it.
in that. They
Yeah.
see value. Like I've worked with women where I've had to actually cut off working with them because we rehash the same things over and over again, right? And then it becomes clear to me that, oh, and there are people that are serial, they go from one thing to another to another to another to try and fix
Right.
themselves.
Serial therapist goers.
Yeah, and they
Yeah.
draw all this different stuff. And then I realized, oh, this is their thing. This is the thing that they like,
It's their career almost, their activity, their
Mm.
hobby is therapy.
is therapy. And so it's like, so there does come a point when you're getting solutions where, and a good therapist will say, geez, you know what? I'm not sure if you actually want to like move
Mm.
past this. Because now it really does seem like, um that there's a part of you that likes to hang on to this.
But I don't want to confuse the audience with there are those people. I'd say that's
That's very small percentage.
yeah, I'd say
It's very small.
probably 2 in 10 1 in 10 that you're working with. The other 8 are going to therapy, not with us, but going to therapy
and not getting solutions.
and not getting solutions because it's in the best interest of the bad therapist to keep them in a victim mentality because they're getting paid. Yeah. And that is really common in trauma therapy.
Yeah.
That the whole Gabor Mate model is disgusting to me. And he's the Bill Wilson of the trauma industry.
Right.
He is so destructive in his talks about victimizing people and keeping them in a state of perpetual generational trauma, and he talks in that voice, very clinical sounding and very soft. He's so full of shit. So, but I don't think it's diabolical in his case.
I think he means
genuinely believes this stuff because he's never grown past it himself.
Right.
And so now he's built a model that's self-sustaining for himself. And that's the classic sort of issue. With the freedom model, we always have an end date because I don't have any dog in the fight of your behaviors. None. As a coach in the freedom model, I'm asking questions with the Socratic method. I have the facts in my hand. Then you do with it what the hell you want to. And if somebody asks me about trauma and says, I want to slap my kid because I was slapped. And I say, well, do you really want to do that? And do you think it's appropriate? Well, sometimes I feel like it's appropriate. I want to hurt them. I have people say things like that. And they say, then I say, well, let's ask some questions about that. And the first question is, do I need to do this? And I say, no, you don't need to do that. You have options. You could handle it this way. And then they go, oh, and so you walk people out if they're willing to ask they have to ask questions of themselves too. So there's that back and forth process that happens, but it's all geared towards an end goal that you'd have to define first. What does getting over your trauma look like? And for me, I didn't have it anymore.
Right. I wasn't reacting. I was reacting to situations of today appropriately for what was happening today, not based on what happened to me in the past.
Now, I want to say one last thing. A traumatic childhood, I found also when you get past the cued reactions, and that part is done with, which is awesome. I found now that I have a skill set in very difficult, violent situations out in the street or protecting my family that I am an expert in. So I have leveraged the shit that I went through. And my wife always says to me, I never have to worry when I'm with you because I know shit will be taken care of.
Yeah.
And now, so I've leveraged the skill of all that violence I can be in situations that are really dicey and I'm calm as a cucumber. I know exactly how to handle myself. And so all trauma isn't bad.
Yeah. We learned,
so you can even leverage the bad. Okay. Because you figured out where it's appropriate to use and where it's not.
Yeah.
And there's a wonderful, wonderful thing about that. Your whole past isn't screwed.
And look what you guys have been able to create, it's just phenomenal. I'm like, yeah. I'm just really conscious of time now because I've kept you longer than I said. I'm so sorry.
No, we love it.
Yeah. I really, I think like we'll wrap it up. Is there, I thank you so much for everything that you guys are doing. It's just awesome, really, really awesome. If my life has completely changed.
That's awesome.
It's just I can't thank you enough, and I'm gonna shout it from the rooftops and continue to do
it. Thank you. You already have referred people to us. It's been wonderful.
I'm telling everyone about it. So, any sort of final things that you guys want to say before we wrap up?
I think just our phone number. If you want to talk to me and Michelle privately, we answer the phone. It's 888.
Well, it's 1 because she's in Australia.
Oh, that's why I have her. That's why I have
1-888-424-2266. But the best way from out of the country, from out of the US to get to us would be probably over social media.
That's true. Messaging.
Private messaging on Facebook. We have the Freedom Model Facebook page. We have the Freedom Model Facebook group. It's a private group. We have members from all over the world. We're on Instagram. We're on YouTube. All our podcasts. You can reach us through our podcast, the Addiction Solution. And
yeah, the Addiction Solution Podcast. And if you want to contact us by email, it's info@thefreedommodel.org.
Yeah.
And our website is thefreedommodel.org.
Super easy.
Also, if you contact us by email and you don't get a response within 24 hours, we almost always respond that quickly.
We do.
Look in your junk folder because Gmail
for whatever
doesn't
reason,
like us.
Even if we respond to you, it may end up in your junk folder.
Yeah, they see us as spam, even though we don't spam. I think we've been censored to a certain degree. I know we have. So there's AA people there. Yeah, they don't like us too much.
Yeah.
So if you contact us and you don't hear from us, keep checking the junk folder, and that's info@thefreedommodel.org. That's the email address.
Yeah.
I'll add it all to the links to the show. And
yes, and we'll spread it. What is the name of your podcast again?
Insight.
Yeah, that's right.
So yeah, so cool. All right, I'm gonna go back to bed.
All right,
it's time, right? I'm so late there. What time is it there?
It's 1:30 in the morning.
So. Oh my God. I can't believe that's...
Well, thank you so much for having us.
Of course. Yeah. It was like, this is really important at the top of my list to do this work. Anyway, but yeah. All right. Have an awesome day. And
thank you so much.
Yeah. All right.
Okay.
Thanks.
All right.
Bye.
Bye, Julia.
Bye.